What's going on, team? It's only been about a week, I think. I didn't expect to do a YouTube this soon, but there's definitely enough to talk about in Ocular and Sphere to do one. So I'm doing one. I mostly want to talk about Ocular, but clearly Sphere needs to be addressed since it went from 30 to 23 literally the next day, well, starting the next day after I did my YouTube, which is pretty unfortunate. I could start with Sphere, but let's start with Ocular. So I think that the market is really getting Ocular wrong right now, and I am incredibly confident that one of the following three paths happen with Ocular, and the Black Swan event, which is a massive stock offering, is completely off the table. So what are the different paths that Ocular can take, and why do I think the stock's going to go up a lot with each of the paths? So the first path, the most obvious path, as I've talked about many times, is they sign a partnership, and they do that for both wet AMD and diabetic retinopathy, and they bring in X amount of money up front, and the partners fund the trials. Okay. The market cap of Ocular is about $500 million. If they were to bring in, I don't know, 100 to 300 million in cash, and then also have the trials. I love how my dog's drinking water in the background, and it's driving me crazy. The minute I go on this YouTube, there has to be some goddamn noise and she's never going to stop drinking the water. Do you hear it? Maisie. Okay. I'm very sensitive to sounds. Longtime followers of mine on YouTube will know that there's a bird that comes just like 6 months out of the year, and it sings outside of my window, and it sings the same chirp over and over and over again, and it drives me just bananas. Anyway, so path one, Ocular signs a partnership. The partner funds either wet AMD, diabetic retinopathy, or just wet AMD. And Ocular gets either 50% of profits in the US going forward if the drug's approved, or maybe low double digit royalties, depending on what the terms of the partnership are. Okay. Now, everybody kind of thinks that if they do that, the stock goes up a lot. But the part that people are really worried about is what happens if they can't sign a partnership. And I think the market is pricing in a much larger chance than there is for the plan B being a negative event. Now, this is where it gets tricky. So the CEO has said many times publicly, and I've spoken to him, that they will not do a dilutive, a large dilutive offering to fund the trials. He said this as recently as on a public call on the Cowen call, not Cowen, excuse me, on the JMP call this week, which is a must listen. It's on their website, the Fireside Chat. He says it at the end, the last 2 minutes. You can skip right to it, and he makes it very clear that if the partner path is not the path they take, they have line of sight. He didn't use the word line of sight. He used that in previous calls, but they have a path to raise enough money to do either diabetic retinopathy or wet AMD and get to NDA, non-dilutive or minimally dilutive. My definition of minimally dilutive, by the way, would be like they sell 10% of the company to a partner as part of a partnership, right? I confirmed with him, which is obvious, that if they did a $200 million stock offering at $4, that would not be minimally dilutive. Okay. There's just a lot to unpack here. The company currently has like $80 million of cash, and it's burning $20 million a quarter. And that's before any trials for TKI. Okay. Diabetic retinopathy would cost $80 million. to get to NDA. And a superiority trial in wet AMD would cost 80 million or so to get to NDA. They would do one or the other. They probably couldn't do both if they didn't partner. They have 80 million in cash now and they burn 20 million a quarter. They can't get to an NDA in either of those indications until 2025 at the earliest, maybe even 2026. Diabetic retinopathy trial would take a year once it's fully enrolled. And it wouldn't start enrolling until the first quarter of 2024. So if it takes a year to enroll, you're looking at 2026 for an NDA. They burn $20 million a quarter in cash. So the company would need to raise something along the lines of $150 to $200 million today to be fully funded to get to an NDA in either diabetic retinopathy or wet AMD. And he is very clear that whatever path they take in the next few weeks will fund the trials to NDA. He's not piecemealing it, where he's going to do some of it now and then raise some of it at the end of the year and some of it, in 2025, 2024. And then he's also been very clear it's going to be non-dilutive or minimally dilutive. So here's what I think. I think that the odds of going it alone and being able to raise that $150 to $200 million in a non-dilutive or minimally dilutive way is extraordinarily hard. The only way they really could do it is if they sold Dextenza, and I'm not even sure Dextenza would fetch $200 or $250 million today. If they did it through some sort of debt financing, I don't think they could raise more than $50 million. If they did debt financing and a secondary, they could raise maybe $125 million. And that to me is probably the worst case scenario. You wake up one day and they do a $75 million stock offering. They raise $50 million in debt. So they raise $125 million. They have 75 on hand. They have 200 in total. And they tell you that that's enough to get to NDA for diabetic retinopathy or a superiority trial in wet AMD. I just don't see it. I don't see that as the path. I think if that does happen, just like I described it, where they do a $75 million stock offering and $50 million in debt, the stock would go down. And maybe it goes down like 20%. Now, the much more likely outcome is they do a partnership. Now, how do we look at what this is worth? So if you watch or you listen to the fireside chat this week, I'm more convinced than ever that this drug works and will succeed in a pivotal trial for both diabetic retinopathy and wet AMD. Now, diabetic retinopathy, with the caveat being they've yet to even test it in that indication. And they're doing the phase 1 trial now. And there is risk that even though there is a scientifically proven reason why, if it worked in wet AMD, it would work in diabetic retinopathy, just like the other drugs have that are on the market, it's not a sure thing. But assuming that phase 1 trial is a success, which is a big if, your only real questions in my mind, whether it works in wet AMD or whether it works in diabetic retinopathy, is if there's a safety signal that pops up when you have the large N trials. And that's one of the main reasons why they do this. So what is this worth today? And how do you arrive at what the value is? So my gut tells me that you're looking at $2 to $5 billion in sales in each of those indications, wet AMD and diabetic retinopathy. So combined, you're looking at 4 to 10 billion in sales, really. And the multiple you'd put on that could be anywhere between 5 and 10, but we'll go with 5. So that gets you to 20 to 50 billion in future value if this works. Okay. If we put a 25% chance of it working, which I think it's probably much higher than that, you get 5 billion to 12.5 billion. Okay. And then if you discount it to today, cut it in half, 2.5 billion to, 6 billion. That would be today's NPV of what this is worth, 2.5 to 6 billion. And it's trading at a $500 million market cap. And I did use a 25% probability, and I cut the value in half for time value of money for a few years. And I think a partner could easily value this today at north of 1 billion NPV. And if they value it north of 1 billion NPV, then considering the fact they could do both the diabetic retinopathy trial and the superiority wet AMD trial for under 200 million, the other 800 million would go to Ocular, which shows you how much room you have for Ocular to get a very large upfront payment in this partnership, and why I'm so confident that they will sign a partnership. Because the size of the markets are so big, and the possibility of this working in both indications is so high, that if your business development at these companies, it's well worth the risk of putting up the cash to see whether or not this succeeds. Very simplistic numbers right now, just to be clear. If a partner were to pay Ocular 300 million upfront cash, fund both trials, call it 200 million more, the only cost to a partner would be $500 million pre-milestones and royalties to see if this works. If it works in just one of the two indications, that 500 million will turn into 10 billion. They'll make 20 times their investment if it works in one of the two indications. So it's, I would have more pushback if I thought that the proof of concept wasn't there for wet AMD, but it's increasingly clear to me that based on the Australia trial and based on the US trial, that we have clear evidence that the drug is active and is doing what they say it intends to do. And you do not need it to last for 10 months in all patients. You need to last for 7, 8, 9 months. If it lasts for 7, 8, 9 months, you have a blockbuster drug. These are shots in the eye. And if you can cut that in half, from a 4-month or a 2-month treatment to an 8-month treatment, it's a home run. And I just can't see how you don't have multiple people interested in this. And guess what? He confirmed it on the fireside. Multiple people in the data room still. Very active data room. Why would he talk about a very active data room this far along if the end result is going to be raising some debt and selling some equity? So you have to ask yourself, what is the possibility he's just bluffing and we get to the end of June or July and he has nothing? No partnerships, no plan B. They're going to run out of cash and they can't fund either of these trials. I mean, I just think that's nearly zero at this stage. And I think the market is putting a way too high percentage chance of that happening. So if you're at a $500 million market cap now, everything that I just went through, whether the partner values it today at 500 million, values it today at 1 billion, values it today at 2 billion, the numbers for Ocular, even in just a $500 million scenario, they get 200 million up front, 300 million up front, versus their $500 million market cap. The partners fund both trials, and they keep a significant share of the future profits. It would be well over $1 billion market cap if that happened. That's a double. And I think the math is probably going to be better than that. I think a partner is going to value this drug at $1 billion, not 500 million, or maybe even more than $1 billion. So to me, when you're this far along in the game and you have the company still using words like very near term and extremely active data room, it seems very, very hard to me that this doesn't work. And I know why it's 635, because all the biotech people I speak to just aren't interested in it. And it's not because they don't think the drug works or they're specifically negative on the TKI. They've been around, it's been around for years, and Dextenza has disappointed. The company has never signed a partnership in the 5 years that Anthony has been there. And, they just have no real interest in it. So to me, short interest isn't that high. If you want to, test it with that. If there was 20 or 30% of the float short, then I would say that the data is bad and that, this is all lies. But the data is really good. And you have one of the world's leading ophthalmologists advising them. He puts in like 20% of his time. He's an advisor. And he joined last summer. He's one of the top, could be like the top 5 in the world. And he's, standing by the data. So yeah, I'm just amazed by it. Now, when will this happen? I would have thought it would happen within a week or two from last conference call. After yesterday, after the fireside, it might not happen until the end of June. I own a lot of June options, so I obviously hope it happens by June OpX. But I'm very confident it will happen by the end of June. He even reiterated that yesterday, that if they're going to start a trial on wet AMD in Q3, they have to have it done before then. Which leads me to another point. He's made it very clear they can only do diabetic retinopathy or wet AMD on their own. They can't do both. Okay. And he's also been very excited about the diabetic retinopathy path. And he's talked about that in great detail recently. But most of their call is on wet AMD, because that's the thing that they've been testing it in. Now, if he's planning on doing it alone and choosing the diabetic retinopathy path, why keep talking about how they're ready to start a trial of wet AMD in Q3? And, it just doesn't make any sense to me. The way I view it is this. He has term sheets, probably from multiple parties. He said there's multiple parties in the data room still. And he is comfortable with all the term sheets. And he's trying to get more. This is just coming from me. I have not been told this. I got pretty much nothing out of him when I spoke to him. And the only way you could be as confident as he is if he has bids to hit. That's it. You can't be that. You can't be at this point otherwise. So I am exceedingly confident that whatever bid he has to hit will be a winner for the company. Whether that's a partnership or it's selling Dextenza for $250 million. I mean, look, the initial disappointment, if they don't partner, will be high. But if they can bring in the money, 200 million, 150 to 200 million in a minimally dilutive way, and they get to retain the rights to this asset, and they get to launch the phase 3 trials on their own, wow. I mean, you could be looking at a 20 to 40 bagger if that happened in a few years. So I'll be disappointed from a catalyst perspective if they don't partner. And of course, if the stock goes down on it. But the key is bringing in the money and having a non-dilutive outcome. I see it's already 10:21. I have 10 more minutes. I do a lot of things around here. I also have to put up rotisserie chickens for lunch, and I have to put them up in 9 minutes. So that's Ocular. Yeah, I just think the market's missing it. Now there's a dark pool seller today. So, no reason to rush, or if you know how to use dark pools, you can buy as much as you want in the dark pool. But I'm amazed by it. $500 million market cap. I mean, I think realistically, this will be between 1 and 2 billion in a short period of time after they partner. You'd be looking at a company with 350 million, 250 to $500 million in cash, probably. They have other assets, and they're going to retain a huge amount of the profits from this if it works. So anyway, I'm obviously very excited about it. Sphere, I have about 8 minutes, so I'm going to do this pretty quickly. This went from 30 to 22 because there was a cost overrun for the 20th time. And it was 125 million cost overrun. Plus, they're going to burn more cash this year preparing for the opening. And overnight, people decided to take away the sum of the parts story here. The sum of the parts story with Sphere was you have the 300 million of Sphere debt. You have whatever it is, 500 million of MSGE, the stake you have in it. And MSGN is worthless. And then there was a little net cash, I think, once they built it out. Now, people say MSGE is worthless because they're going to have to sell it all to fund all the cost overruns that are going to come. And you overnight go from Sphere being valued in a sum of the parts manner at like 300 million to now it's being valued at over $1 billion. And that's why it went from 30 to 23. Okay. I think this is mostly wrong. I think that they will not have to sell some or any of their MSG stake. I think that the venue will be very cash flow positive right when it launches. There's 25 U2 shows that I think they will make between $1 and $2 million each show. I think the market doesn't know anything about the economics of the U2 shows because the company hasn't told us anything. And if you do the math of what they're grossing there, plus the luxury suites, plus food and beverage, you get to like a $10 million a night kind of thing. And U2 is not getting the 10 million. Maybe U2 gets 8 of it, 7 of it. Every show they add is pure operating leverage because they have to put on the show and produce the show. And once that's produced, they put a CD in and the fucking thing plays. So, the two things the market wants to see with Sphere is they want to see advertisers come in, sponsorships come in. That might not happen until they launch. Who cares? They'll definitely get naming rights for this thing, and they'll definitely have sponsors. It's going to be one of the great wonders of the world. And people are worried the movie's not going to work. And I think this movie will work, the Aronofsky movie. But if this one doesn't work, then they'll find one that works. The technology is insane. You tell me, for people that have been to Vegas a lot, there's not a one of you that will tell me that you wouldn't want to go see a movie in this thing at least once to see what it's like. Vegas is pretty boring from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. There's not a lot to do. The last 2 times I've been with my wife, I looked for day shows to go to. And it's basically like the bad version of Carrot Top at like 2 p.m. Unless you want to go clubbing or to go in the pool, but you only could do 6 months out of the year anyway. There's just not a lot to do and gamble. And there's only so many hours you can gamble. So I think that absolutely nothing's changed for me. I obviously like it more at 23 than I did at 30. I started buying it at 25 before I ever did the YouTube, unfortunately. And I still think it's going to be a huge success. So yeah, that's Sphere. All right, let's see what questions you guys have. I would note they can't do both AMD and DR without strategic. I just don't see them putting one on shelf to go along with the other. It's exactly what I was saying, Glenn. Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. The only way they don't sign a partnership is if nobody wants this drug. Because I've proven the math is so cheap for a partner that for 500 million bucks, a partner can get it all. Pay them 300 million upfront, 200 million to fund the trials, give them a profit share and a bunch of, milestone payments if it works. And all they're on the hook for is 500 million bucks, the partners. And nobody can tell me with a straight face that these 2 indications and this opportunity is not worth $500 million to, $100 billion pharmaceutical companies. So the only reason why they wouldn't sign the partnership is if nobody wants it and if the drug's is bullshit, or they have such a good option B that the option B makes it better to retain it all and only do one indication. I just don't see it. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's such an incredible value add. YouTube until we're watching minus hosting. I mean, thanks, Glenn. That's very nice to say. Also, as a spinoff, additional holders will always natural sellers. Yeah, I mean, Sphere is so misunderstood. There's no conference calls. People think that it's going to be a money pit that's going to, burn to zero. It basically, Sphere had its sell-off twice. First, it sold off when it spun because people wanted to own the cash flowing MSGE. And then it sold off when they had a cost overrun of $125 million. And they had no conference call to dissuade anybody that they might sell their MSG stake down. So what kind of handicap do you think Sphere would have simply because it's being run by James Dolan? Huge handicap. Huge. No question about it. But if the venue is a success, it won't matter. It won't matter. I don't think Dolan necessarily does the worst capital allocation decisions. He likes money, but he definitely does things that are self-interest. But I don't think, let's say, for instance, recapitalizing MSG networks inside Sphere is in his best interests. He's much more likely to tell the bondholders to go suck it, take a $500 million hit on the bond, that puts the bondholders, and restructure it, right? So, that's one of the risks people say is he's going to bail out MSGN somehow. All right. I wish I had more time, guys, but I have to put the chicken. I basically got out what I wanted to say. I'm very excited about it. I'm sure somehow I'll get fucked here. But, and by the way, Ocular is going to be added to the XBI if it's about this level or higher in, the third week of June. So I don't know if it'll make it this time, depending on when the news happens. But that is a huge tailwind. It's like $100 million in stock to buy or some ridiculous amount of money if it gets added to the XBI. I don't remember the exact number. 75 million. A lot of money. Yes, Spinco was down 8%. MSG was down 8% in the cost overrun, Paul, because they were worried that they were going to sell MSG in the whole to fund it. I mean, they botched the whole thing so bad. Now MSG is bounced back, so it's not in the death spiral anymore, which is also very good for Sphere. So if Sphere does have to sell the MSG, hopefully they'll be able to place it at a decent price versus both of them just being in a death spiral. All right, I got to go. Peace. Didn't think this would take so long. I got so passionate about Ocular, I just kept talking. I'll speak to you guys soon when there's news. Take care. Bye.